everybody. Today I'll be doing my presentation for Intro to Women's Literature. Sorry about the screen. Hopefully I'll be able to flip it in editing, but if I can't, I'm sorry. You can follow along. I do have the slides available to view independently if you want to watch those along with viewing the video online. So, this was written and presented by me. Our first piece here is a piece that I painted myself. It's called Accepted by Anonymous. What inspired me for this piece is just how all of the women throughout literature have struggled so much, and a lot of them have chosen to publish anonymously in order for them to be able to even have their work accepted. One of my favorite quotes is by Virginia Woolf, and it is, "I would venture to guess that Anna, who wrote so many poems without signing them, was often a woman." This is original work inspired by the female authors of the past. Looking throughout history, numerous authors published their works anonymously. We see historical significant writings once held as anonymous authors, now unmasked. A lot of the authors that were anonymous in the past have had their works found and their names attached to them. So even though they were anonymous before, they're no longer anonymous. Unfortunately, a lot of the authors are still remain anonymous, and we don't know who they are and who belongs to what works. Moving on, I did a few different takes on poetry, doing deep dives into them. One of the poems that I did is Resume by Dorothy Parker. Now, this poem is kind of a satirical poem with dark notes, very dark notes. It's a poem about suicide. And the way that I read it in my head when I read it, it was like someone was having a conversation with someone else. It wasn't just, the author wasn't just writing it to write it for a poem. She was writing it as a conversation piece. And it's something that you would say to a friend in passing when you were trying to dismiss their ideas. So I'm going to read it to you guys. Razors pain you, rivers are damp, acid stains you, and drugs cause cramps. Guns aren't lawful, nooses give, gas smells awful, you might as well live. That piece really spoke to me in many different levels, and I enjoy the dark humor and the way that she writes it. It's like it's one continuous sentence, and it's written as if it's just a single thought that's said in passing, and when you're reading it, you're almost waiting for the response from the other person. Now, this is another piece that is an original. It's a photograph that I took when I was out walking with my kids. We went to the park, and the pond had overflowed, and the grass was covered in about 2 inches of water in the area where I took this photo. And I found just a single page of a book floating in that water. And this really struck me. As soon as I saw it, I knew I had to get a picture of it, because this poem, it reminds me so much of all of the women throughout history whose books have been burned and whose works have been erased and eliminated out of fear. All these women, like Sappho, whose works were held, whose works were eliminated by the Pope Gregory. They burned her works. They tried to destroy as much as they can, but later we discovered some of her works survived through these coffins that were built out of paper mache. So that's how we discovered a lot of her works later on. And unfortunately, most of her writings are gone, but we were able to kind of collect a few of them, and thankfully they weren't just passed over, and people took the time to look at what was written on the papers. Hypatia was another one that was left with only small pieces of her legacy, turning up in documents. She's still one of the most courageous women out there. She was actually murdered by a mob just for her thoughts and her writings. And you'll see that a lot throughout history. The women that stood up the most and had the loudest voices were usually the women that were crucified the most. Either their reputations or physically they were harmed just for having their own opinions. The next one that I'm going through is a book from, or well, not a book, but a poem from Anne Bradstreet. It's the author to her book. This poem stood out to me so much, and I felt like this poem was written for me. I am an author myself, and I felt every line of this, because there has been so many times when I have written something and I don't want anybody to see it because it just did not turn out the way I like it. And my friends or my family will read it and be like, oh, that's fantastic. And it's like, no, don't share this. It's awful. And no matter how many times you try to fix it, it still ends up being awful. And this poem just screams that. Thou ill-formed offspring of my feeble brain, who after birth didst by my side remain, till snatched from me thence by friends less wise than true, who thee abroad exposes to public view, made thee in rags, halted to thee pressed to trudge. Yet, being mine own, at length effected would thy blemished amend, if so I could. This is where she talks about wishing she could go back and fix the problems before it had been published, but because her friends did it without her knowledge, she just is stuck with what it is. I wish thy face, but more defects I saw. I washed thy face, but more defects I saw, and rubbed off a spot, still made a flaw. I stretched thy joints to make thee even feet. Yet still thy runneth more hobbling than it is meet. And better dressed to trim thee was my mind, but not save homespun cloth, I thee house I find. In this array amongst vulgar mayest thou roam, and critics' hands beware thou does not come. And take thy way where yet thou art not known. If for the father asks, say thou hast none. And for thy mother, she, alas, is poor, which caused her thus to send thee out the door. And at the end of this poem, this last line here is her saying, is her speaking directly to her book itself, saying, I don't want you to say, if you have to be out there in the world, which you already are, and I can't do anything about it, just tell people. Tell people it's because I was too poor and I had to get you out to press. I think that's so humorous. And that's the way I feel sometimes about my schoolwork. It's like, I have no choice. We are at the deadline. I can't fix you anymore, no matter how much I want to. And I just have to put you out into the world. And it's frustrating sometimes. And I feel that with this poem. I can feel the words personally. And I really do love this poem. Moving on. This is a personal poem that I wrote myself, The History of Women. The photo is just a stock photo that I got off of Google. I couldn't find the origins of the photo, but it fits in with the lines of this poem. The History of Women by Lucille Springfield. A woman's life is not her own, giving, caring, sacrifices, but none for herself, no. They bring her up this way, taught to present herself, to please others, to smile, to be happy, but not for herself, all for show. Suffer in silence, they say. Suck it up and move on. Women drain themselves to fill others' souls. A lady they want, pretty to look at, yet silent and subservient. Supportive, yet not supported. Ladies are taught how to walk, how to talk, what to say, when to say it, how to look, how to dress. Perfection is what society declares beauty, an ever-changing concept. Ladies manipulate their bodies with blades to adapt, to hold the status quo, to please those watching, all while being criticized for adapting to what they expect of them. She then gave up her name for his, for family, to continue humanity, the very race who took her life from her. A mother now, expectations thrust upon her and the children she raised. Not wanting to judge, she continues the cycle, teaching her children the lessons drilled into her. This poem here is a poem that I wrote thinking about the expectations society puts onto us. When I was writing this, I thought back to all of the times that my mother or my grandmother or my father would tell me to stand up straight, to walk, to ladies don't walk like that, ladies don't talk like that, ladies don't sit like that. And I always found it odd that how ladies had to be held to this higher standard, why men could sit with their legs open, and it was less frowned upon for men to spit than it was ladies, and women are to be like children, seen but not heard. And it's just so, and the amount of time someone told me that was man's work or woman's work growing up, it just always irked me how so many women now are independent. They're raising their children on their own. There's no man around. They're doing all of these things that are considered man's work. And they're still not considered equal. And even with all these restrictions that society has put onto women, we still find ourselves teaching our children that these are the standards. These are what we have to do to fit in. And more women are teaching their children that especially their girls, that they can do anything and that everybody's equal. But we still have that societal influence that tells us that girls have to act a certain way. And it's not only do we bring shame onto ourselves, but society puts shame on how we raise our children. So if we're not raising our children to believe a certain way, then we're looked down on not just as a woman ourselves, but also looked down on as a mother. I have a daughter myself, and I don't know how many times the choices that I make for her and the things I allow her to do are constantly questioned. No matter how it's either I'm too restrictive or I'm too lenient. I either let her dress too provocatively or I don't let her dress the way she wants to. And going into these stores, I see there's clothing that's, especially with stores like Justice, before it shut down, it was all crop tops. And there was barely any shirts that were appropriate as far as I was concerned. And yet there's other parents who would allow their daughters to wear stuff like that. And it shouldn't be. And I didn't look down on the mothers who let their children wear those things. And it shouldn't be pushed upon by society to decide what we do, how we do it, how we speak, how we behave. I mean, yes, you should hurt other people. That's a given. Those are morals that extend beyond sex. Those are morals that you would teach all of your children. But we shouldn't be teaching our girls that they can't do things, that they have to present themselves in a certain way, when we're teaching our sons the total opposite. It's bit hypocritical of us to turn around and then after teaching our daughters, oh, you can't say that, you can't do that because of boys, and then turning around and when our sons do it, we go, oh, well, boys will be boys. And no, we should teach our sons not to do those behaviors. Teach our daughters that something like that could happen in a given situation, but also teach our sons that it's not okay to do that. It's a strange concept. And you see it with literature so much that men are taught that they can express themselves freely and they can write and they can achieve these great things. And it's reinforced when it's these male authors who are getting all of the publishing and their works are splashed everywhere, but not the female authors. Even J.K. Rowling, she did not print her work with her first name. And thinking about it, would Harry Potter be what Harry Potter is today if we knew from the beginning that J.K. Rowling was a woman? Would her work have been published the same? Would her work have been accepted the same if we knew that she was a woman? We won't ever know because she chose to use initials instead of putting her name out there. And a lot of women still do that today. They either use pen names, and I see it in all my writing groups, women choosing pen names that are unisex so that their works are accepted more, or they're choosing to use either initials or leaving their work anonymous altogether. And it's sad that in the 21st century that we're still having to raise ourselves above and beyond just to meet the same standards that a man would. It's ridiculous. Well, get off my soapbox now. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. If you would like to see the full presentation on backwards and a little bit more up close, the slideshow is available without the audio, and you can watch it along with the YouTube to kind of keep track of where we are, if you'd like. And thank you for coming along with me on my presentation. I really enjoyed this class, and I look forward to taking more literature classes in the future. Thank you. Bye.